evening panel is sponsored by Fort Worth Writers Boot Camp. My name is Rachel Pilcher. I'm the Managing Director of Wildcatter Exchange, as well as the owner and founder of Fort Worth Writers Boot Camp. So we're very happy. I'm very happy to have y'all here. Our panel today is going to include Will Evans, publisher of Deep Vellum. Will Evans is the publisher executive director of Deep Vellum Publishing, a not-for-profit literary publisher that seeks to enhance the open exchange of ideas among cultures and to connect the world's greatest untranslated contemporary writers of literature and creative nonfiction with English language readers for the first time. Very important.
I've condensed it for you. It's all right. Thank you.
They do translations.
Yes, perfect.
They do translations. Carolyn Collier is a novelist, grant writer, journalist, and musician. She is an author and journalist who believes in the possibility of mapping a better world with words. Her first novel, The Shining City on the Hill, is available now, and the second, Hiawatha's Flood, is coming. It's coming. She is currently employed by TCU, writing about accomplishments of faculty, staff, and students for the TCU magazine and Endeavors, a research magazine. In her career, Caroline has worked as a grant writer, founded Universal Language, an independent publishing company, and ghostwritten memoirs. She has a degree in chemistry and economics from TCU and is a current graduate student in the Master of Liberal Arts program. And in what little free time she finds, it's the little free time, all of that, she makes music. Michael H. Price, our third writer on the panel, is an author, editor, illustrator, journalist, musician, and composer. He is a multidisciplinary artist, band leader, and entrepreneur, currently specializing in creating and self-distributing graphic novels, restoring lost comics of yesteryear, and playing in 3 working bands, the City Light Singers, Salt Lick, and the Swing Masters with Sumter Bruton. His journalism career included long stints on staff as writer and editor at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and the Fort Worth Business Press. His long-form compositions often grace the stage at Fort Worth's legendary Hip Pocket Theater.
There you go.
What a panel.
I'm so glad you made it.
Quite a panel here. So I would like to start off as moderator and just asking you what your main interest was in doing niche publishing. What brought you to that? And whoever would like to start, we'll go from there.
Niche publishing, niche publishing, you say potato, I say potato.
I might say it both ways.
I do too, yeah. It's like depending on the audience, you know, it's like niche, niche, very niche, very niche. I got into that in rebellion against an old journalism school edict that I heard when I was a freshman in college. Avoid the esoteric. Like, why? That's what's interesting. And once instructed thus, I just started sticking all the arcane and esoteric references I could get away with into mainstream journalism. Little hiding Easter eggs in your copy for the astute reader to find, assuming that your reader is smarter than you are. And paying them the compliment of rewarding their attention by trying to be as smart as they are. If you write up to your reader as opposed to writing down, as the current mainstream edict goes, dumb it down. If you smart it up instead of dumb it down, that reader's going to appreciate it, and you're automatically creating a niche. Elaboration, anyone?
I guess for me, getting into niche publishing or self-publishing in my case, I finished my first novel, and after I had gone through editing it several times, I looked up the process for submitting it to agents and publishing companies and realized that in best case scenario it was going to take 5 years, and that's if everything went well. And I thought the book I'd written was relevant now, and I wanted to spend my energy creating more and writing more, not going through a process that by then was already archaic and shifting because of technology. And so I decided to start my own publishing company with my friend Jeff, who lives in Los Angeles and works in the movie business. And we spent a couple months formatting, getting cover art, doing some outside editing, publishing, and then I moved on to my next project like I wanted to. Just kind of what threw me into the field.
As for me, I'll go ahead and apologize first. I'm usually much more buoyant and exuberant, but I'm a bit sick today, so my apologies for Worth. That Dallas doesn't brought its A game. Getting into niche publishing, I actually, when was told the panel name, I immediately pushed back because I don't consider myself a niche publisher. Although I publish translated literature, I think translations are universal. I think the literature part is what is niche about what I do. Out of everything published in America every year, whatever could be described as literature, which is obviously some sort of level that any type of writing can attain, I think that that is the niche. It is not very many percentage points of everything published, which is roughly 400,000 books a year. And of that 400,000 books a year, on less than 3% of that is translated from other languages. And so finding out that fact was crazy, and if you strip away retranslations of the classics and commercial works and cookbooks and academic books, the number of titles of new works of literature translated from other languages into English every year is about 0.1% of everything published in America. It's between 300 and 500 books in any given year, which is shocking. We have absolutely no idea what's happening in the world in terms of literature. And I've always said that, if every act of communication is an act of translation, which is a famous quote from a philosopher of yesteryear, then cultures communicate through literature. And we're just not doing that in America right now. We are exporting culture, we're not importing it. So we're really losing out on perspectives and ideas and new forms of writing and creative expression and storytelling and all those things that we love about writing, and which then leads to publishing. And so what got me into publishing exactly was in graduate school studying Russian culture. I translated a Russian novel and was actually a freshman in college. As a freshman in college, my professor in Russian literature was like, "Don't ever do translation. There's no money in it, and you don't know the language well enough, anyways." And which was a really funny twofold problem. But then in graduate school, I had a professor say, "That's absolutely silly because there's no better way to learn a language than to try translating." And so she helped me through this process and inspired me to do it. And then that's when I learned about all the numbers I just gave you and how dire they were. And then I was reading the blog of one particular publisher that publishes translated literature, and he inspired me to start my own publishing house. And then the time came to start my own publishing house, and I didn't want to be small, and I don't plan on being small for very long. I've just started. We only have 4 books printed. The 5th is at the printers. The 5th and 6th are at the printers now. And but we're putting out a book or 2 a month, every month for at least the next 3 years, because I have books signed for every month for the next 3 years. But our plan is to build ourselves into a robust, mid-sized publisher, and we actually want to change the conversation from here in North Texas. So.
Yeah.
Nice. So what would y'all like for potential writers or translators to know about niche publishing? Just in general, what would they need to know to get into it, to get started?
Do we have anyone here who's publishing right now?
As writers or publishers?
As writers, as publishers?
As translators.
There you
Got
go.
2 translators over here.
And yes, that's exactly. The minute somebody tells you you can't do something, that's the time to do it.
Amen.
Show them what you got. You'll never prove it to yourself any other way. Write to please yourself. You are your niche, but then you broaden that niche. If you are not writing about what you love passionately, you're not writing. If you're trying to follow a trend, chase that trend monster until it collapses or kills you, then you're defeating your own purpose as a writer. I started out in commercial publishing outside, not counting the newspaper industry, but in commercial publishing as in books for the bookstores. I started out writing about Depression period horror movies. Great favorite field of mine. Is that a niche? Yeah, I kind of think it might be. But the next thing you know, and the further niche within the niche was that my original partner and I were not writing about your Frankensteins and Draculas. We were writing about obscure, low-budget pictures that hadn't been seen since 1933. Next thing you know, the first printing from a publisher in England has sold out, has been totally bought up by the Nostalgia Book Club. Very successful. Of course, the sale of the Nostalgia Book Club is kind of like landing on the remainder table at Barnes & Noble. But one thing leads to another. That first book, Forgotten Horrors, became by default a mainstream publication. It has never been out of print since 1980. The mainstream picks it up. Big audience in the so-called monster kid generation. That is the kids of the baby boom kids who grew up on rock and roll and horror movies in the 50s. They eat that stuff up. They have kids who dig it. They have kids who dig it. I had a publisher in Baltimore until recently when I yanked the contracts and went Maverick with Todd Camp here, who would try to rationalize sluggish sales with, well, our audience is graying. It's like, okay, get them some Grecian formula. I mean, you know, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to reinvigorate? When we caught that publisher using a self-publishing platform called CreateSpace, like, wait a minute, I don't need a middleman to do that. I can do that. Total mainstream. Niche, if you write it with passion, if you write it to please yourself, you're going to please any number of people. Same way in music, same way in poetry, same way in art. What else?
I think it's a good point that you just brought up music, and I was lucky or unlucky enough to be in the music industry working and creating music before I got into publishing, and the same sort of technological transformation that completely turned the music industry on its head as far as taking away the middleman, making recording, distribution, marketing accessible to everyone. Happened to music first and then publishing, and there are good developments and bad developments as a result. The good developments are there are no middlemen, there are no tastemakers, there are no clearinghouses, there is no priority on what might sell if you don't want, you know. So what Mike was saying about write what you're passionate about, develop your own voice, your own message. Don't write to make money, because the bad element of the technological transformation is that there's a lot less money for your general author. And plus your audience you're competing against a lot more books, and a lot of them are free. So if someone wants to write a book as a career plan, I don't know if I would definitely recommend that. But, you know, if you're having a publishing company and having, you know, a long-range plan, that's a different deal.
The minute you start chasing a trend, it's going to gobble you up and spit you out. I used to get amused at Stan Lee, the publisher of Marvel Comics. I knew Stan Lee as a fan when he was an established publisher doing, you know, the Hulk, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and all that. And it always amused me when they would try to introduce a teenage element in their stories, because you've got, like, basically these middle-aged, middle-class, wealthy Jewish guys trying to pander to an audience they don't understand. That's why when you see like a Batman story involving a rock and roll band in the 60s, all the electric guitars look like violins. Like, wow. And you know, it's like Stan Lee's and Jack Kirby's teenage hero comics in the 60s. All the teenagers wore like suits and fedoras. Like, no, you're not getting it. They were pandering. But they had something magical going on, because Jack Kirby was bringing his epic imagination to these. The writing, forget it. Lame dialogue, overblown pseudo-Shakespearean bombast on the part of Stan Lee, the writer. But this passion to tell an epic story from one writer, from one artist, Jack Kirby, who transcended all that nonsense, Oh, what's the latest trend? Well, who cares? I got an epic story to tell, and I don't care if it's an epic that costs 10 cents at the corner drugstore. It's still an epic. And all those kids who could see past the superficial jive and the kind of out of tune with the teenage trends thing were picking up on this passion to tell a story. Niche, yeah. How far mainstream has it come? Well, I think last count the Disney company owned Marvel Comics. That was a niche publishing house. You got passion. Phil Record, great editor from times past at the Telegram, when he was teaching at TCU. He would hand in a story and Record would throw it back at him. Say, show me some passion. You know, what does that mean? He said, show me some passion. I can't tell you what it is. You'll know it when you get it. Go get it.
To pick up real quick on what both of you guys said, we all come from quite different experiences in publishing, but we all, I think, share the same idea of the independent voice is a way of saying what we're saying. Instead of saying niche, because I truly believe independent alternatives to mainstream culture are important. And so it can be niche at the start, but then culture catches up if it's good. And that's, you can see that in music, you can see it in film, and we definitely see it in literature.
And get elsewhere.
Yeah, we haven't seen it as much in literature. You know, the independent literature community in America, I think, is at a bit of a tipping point right now. Thanks to the digital revolution you talked about, and I used to work in music as well, so it's like really before coming into publishing, and I'm always wondering, like, you had this wonderfully decentralized industry in music, where, I mean, in publishing, 90+% of everything published in this country comes from New York City, and I don't live in New York City, and I've never lived in New York City, and you know, those guys on Fifth Avenue, because they're all guys, those CEOs and editors-in-chief are sitting up in those skyscrapers, and the problem was they used to do great independent work, and then they all started combining and becoming less interesting and less interesting and less interesting over time. And rather than decentralizing like music did once upon a time, which is in New York and LA, and now Austin, Seattle, Chicago, these cities are as important to music as Fort Worth, obviously. I mean, I'm not saying those are the big ones. Then we have Fort Worth also other wonderful cities, and that never really happened to literature, but it can happen now because of the digital revolution. And so to be an author, I mean, to be an author or a translator, one of the most important things is to respect publishing houses that do a bit of tastemaking. I think this term has gotten misused a bit in the self-publishing revolution, just because that tastemakers and gatekeepers are now interchangeably used, where you have publishing houses that publish garbage, and they don't publish original ideas, especially people coming from the periphery of culture like us in Fort Worth as they see it, not as we see it. I think that's something really interesting, though, is there are now independent alternatives like the three of us, like other folks out there. And to be an author or a translator, one important way of getting your foot in the door is to find publishers who do have the same taste as you, because they are taste making. I have a certain editorial taste that I prefer, and I can't tell you how many wasted emails I get from people who don't, people who write in English originally, because they didn't even check my website. They're like, oh, publisher, I'm just going to submit. And they don't know. You know, it's about pairing your vision with the vision of someone else and saying, together we can make something really cool happen. And I think that's when this works really well, and that's what independent publishing, niche publishing is really providing the alternative to. And it's like this new voice, because of distribution channels changing, we can reach the same audience and we can sell more books than those big publishers in New York. Like they now do the same thing movies do, where they sign blockbusters and they throw all their money behind blockbusters, and they don't put any money behind anything else they sign. If you're not a blockbuster, you might as well go niche, you might as well go indie. So.
Which leads to my next question. How do y'all handle, as independents, your marketing? Because I'm sure it's varied as a publisher and as independent writers. You know, how do you market your books?
That's $1 million question.
It is $1 million question.
If anyone in the audience has an answer to it, I'd love to hear it. I'll take notes. People ask me all the time, they're like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, well, I'm going to try. And trying is really all you can do. And so you take advantage of social media as much as you can these days, which is a way of having a conversation with your audience in a really cool way. But then also, marketing is about getting out there, about coming to events like Wildcatter Exchange. And if Wildcatter exchanges don't exist where you live. It's about creating them. It's about shopping local, even though it might cost you a couple dollars more for a book or a CD or something. You know, these things are all marketing. It's about like getting yourself injected into a conversation that's happening somewhere. So for me, I'm not taking out full page ads in the New York Times Book Review because I don't necessarily think it's the right use of money, you know. But I am taking out ads in World Literature Today, which is a bit of a niche publication out of the University of Oklahoma that specializes in translated literature, because that's a good use of money. That's a good way to get introduced to the audience. So, you know, when the time comes and we're built up, then maybe, you know, we'll pair up with some other cool indies, and then we can all advertise together in a place like the New York Times Book Review as like, you know, we're kind of all in this together. And my peer publishers that I consider are a bit spread out across the country and across the world. And so it's a nice way of all of us kind of helping each other out, because if you like my books, hopefully you'll like their books. And other than that, marketing is the Achilles heel of, I mean, it's the Achilles heel of the entire New York publishing establishment too.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
they throw tons of money at it, and it's nothing is proven to work. In the book industry, the statistic is that over 75% of every book, of all the books sold, are recommended by word of mouth, not by an ad or by, you know, seeing it in a bookstore. And so word of mouth is something you can try to control. So that's what they're throwing marketing money at. The same way Coca-Cola sponsors things that don't have anything to do with Coca-Cola, so that at least when you do go to the store and you're like, I am thirsty, maybe your mind will subconsciously go there. So that's what they're doing with books too. And I think that's insidious, and I hate it, but I also am jealous. So.
It's kind of like payola. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah, quite a bit.
Flood the market with so many different flavors of Oreos. Like, how many flavors of graham crackers or chocolate cookies, but of the same brand? You know, do you want the double fudge, or do you want the striped filling, or do you want, you know, it's like, and of course you flood the market so the rival brands get crowded off the shelves. The advantage that I've been fortunate to have is that I own a franchise. The name of this series of books is Forgotten Horrors. We're up to about, I think I'm working on the 10th volume right now. The history of the low-budget independent horror film from 1929 through whatever cutoff point I would end up with. That's a brand. The brand is now the longest-running genre study franchise in commercial publishing. Do I take that for granted? No. I use it as leverage to fund my more eccentric indulgences like the comic books, which, you know, I mean, we're not doing Aliens versus Predator. We're not doing, you know, Batman meets the Hulk. We're doing obscure, personalized narrative pieces in graphic comic books. You know, I mean, graphic novel, good highfalutin term. All we're talking about is plain old funny books. The word of mouth name brand movie franchise makes possible all these other indulgences, and sooner or later they develop momentum. I don't do much commercial advertising, none at all right now, but I find that every time I drop a hint about something new coming out on Facebook, I get a sales spike. Cause and effect. Take it where you find it. That's free advertising, folks. All you got to do is take the time to do it right and don't lie, and let people know what's going on. Todd and I are doing the same thing with this recent edition of our book, Carnival of Souls, which is based on probably the most obscure, low-budget horror film ever made. And yet, it's been in print, not continuously, but fairly regularly since 1991. And sure I'm glad we don't have to draw that thing today, because it sure was a hard job of work. Sure. What else?
I agree with what everyone else is saying, that passionate quality work is going to rise to the surface, and word of mouth is more important than any other kind of marketing you can do. And there's a question if you're publishing digitally and the majority of your audience is going to read on a Kindle or some other form of e-reader. There's an interesting economic question about how much should you charge to generate word-of-mouth advertising and marketing. You need people to read your book if you're not a well-known author. And there's a lot to be said for making it very cheap or even free if you're trying to get your name out there and your message out there. And as far as taking out advertisements, Amazon, Too bad it's kind of a big behemoth that doesn't always act responsibly, but they do offer quite a few methods of promoting yourself and daily deals, getting your name in email blasts or highlighted on the website. That's one good way of marketing along with social media. But the best marketing is quality work, passionate, independent, unique art. You can't replace that. No advertisement in the world is going to make that. That's not that.
Thank you very much. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'd like to open the floor to questions. You can ask any or all of them. Any question?
I was curious how you would make what's the discussion if you're talking to a writer, should they self-publish or should they choose a publisher, a niche publisher? Is there something that is a breaking point for that, or how do you approach that decision point?
For me, I'd say if you're not already a very established author, a Danielle Steele or Michael Crichton, and you do land a contract with a big publishing house, you have to do your marketing anyway. They're not really going to have a budget for that. So I would always urge someone to go independent.
Yes, definitely.
But if they approach you as a niche publisher, you're not a New York publisher, even a small publisher like you guys, do you have things that provide an advantage that someone who's trying to self-publish maybe wouldn't be able to accomplish?
For what independent publishing offers, it's about the fact that if you self-publish, you become me, and so whatever I know, you have to catch up to at least, and then surpass to get at least that experience. And so you can look at it that way versus the big houses, other independent houses. If you want to do a certain amount of marketing yourself and you feel like, yeah, I'm really good at editing myself and I'm really good at marketing myself, not everyone is. I believe in writing and translating as an art form, and I think that artists should be left to create their art. If you like business, otherwise, when you muddy art and business up too much, then sometimes you can lose a bit of the vision. I really respect writers, and that's why I say that. I have absolutely nothing against self-publishing, but at the same time, what publishers offer is quite a bit of dialogue with artists to construct this work of art, and it can be a commercial work of art or a non-commercial work of art. Sure. But then you're helping shape like the actual work itself, and editing is something I do value, and we edit translations as well. I have a couple translators here who can tell you about that, one for sure, and the other one in the future. And then the marketing as well. And so it's about a conversation and getting your name included next to the names you want to be next to. And if it's the right publisher, then you can be in that dialogue. If you self-publish, you're playing catch up, and it's a bit hard, if that makes sense. And so again, it's about finding the right publisher that sees your vision and not just casting like the lightest net you can and trawling all the fish in the sea, because you'll probably catch nothing that way. You need to be a bit targeted, and that's a bit of work at the start, and that is why the publishing industry as a whole kind of exists the way it does with agents and scouts and editors, freelance editors, because there's people who do want your work published somewhere. And it's just cool now that you do have the alternative to do it yourself, to at least get it out there, and if you are willing to do that work, it could have real benefits for you.
Good benefits. If a publisher, I've got two different philosophies going in that direction. They work together. I no longer seek out publishers. I do, however, leave the door open if a publisher wants to seek me out. If I have an idea for a book, as the anthology we're working on right now called Stitches, a collection of humor, I don't want to waste time trolling publishers. Well, what about, and in a year we'll be glad to take a look at your little book, like that kind of condescending attitude that you find in so many of the commercial houses. On the other hand, if an outfit like IDW, the new comic book house in San Diego, were to ask about Stitches, I'd say, sure, we'd be glad to show it to you. Generally speaking, I enjoy inflicting my crackpot opinions on a mass audience so thoroughly well that I'm willing to pay for the privilege. And if it yields a return, all the better for it. On the other hand, if like IDW or Yo Books, Craig Yo's outfit in New York, the Library of American Comics in Florida should approach me, we want you to, I've been working with IDW on their 10-foot hardcover shelf of the collected Dick Tracy for 10 years now. if they want to make that kind of approach, we're like, yeah, that sounds like fun, let's do it. So you do have the opportunity to enjoy the best of both worlds if you're selective about it, and don't butt your heads against the wall shopping for a publisher. When if you've got a book that you need to get out and you don't want to have to wait, get you a self-publishing account and learn how to build a book.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful, and technology has certainly freed up a lot of writers to do what they're doing now. But the question I have is for the audience who aren't necessarily into publishing. How do we know it's a good book? I mean, people can go ahead and they're technologically savvy, understand the whole process, put it together. But what I think it eliminates is the traditional vetting process that comes up with when you have to present what the publishers think are marketable works that are going to go out there. So you as a self-publisher, if I'm going to buy your book and no one has vetted it other than yourself, and you think it's a wonderful book, how do I really know that it is quality work?
Well, for one, you know, if you're going to buy a digital version, they always offer a free section, a free chapter, etc. It's pretty much commonplace, so you can sample it and read the beginning, see if you want to buy the book and continue. Is one way. Reading reviews, word of mouth is another way. And I also hear this same argument made as far as music. You know, a lot of music critics wrung their hands when, you know, their role in the industry became less important. They're like, well, how will people know what to listen to if they don't have me telling them what's good? But as a result, that, you know, people go and curate their own playlists and find their own music, and as a result, music is really diversified. I think there's, you know, across the board, music's at a peak that it's never seen before. You can hear anything.
Beats letting Clear Channel tell you what to listen to.
Yes, that's the worst music you can listen to.
I'd rather make some good, interesting mistakes than have somebody else tell me how to get it right.
Yeah, half the fun is the discovery.
Yeah.
Well, a professional publisher isn't necessarily the end-all be-all of quality. I mean, look at 50 Shades of Grey. It's put out a gajillion copies all over the world.
To be fair, that was self-published first.
That was
the industry catching up to something it caught on fire before it. So that's actually the perfect example of what it's talking about. It was all word of mouth. And yeah, it was garbage, but it hit some sort of, it hit the right niche at the right time.
I was involved.
Because I mean, the story of O was a much better written piece of erotica. We all know this, but like, it wasn't quite the same.
I was involved in the underground comics scene in the 1960s in college. You may not know the term. Many of you may know the term, but artists like Robert Crumb, Gilbert Shelton down at Austin, Frank Stack, now Professor Emeritus of Art at the University of Missouri, all were doing cartooning that looked like cartooning. Hey kids, comics, whoops, adults only. At the same time, when Lenny Bruce was making his shock value statements valid with a much larger audience than he had intended to reach, that demimonde of jazz, comedy, and art, which goes very tightly together. At the same time, when a much more obscure comedian named Rudy Ray Moore, a blues singer, was doing his utterly scandalous routines about the baddest black guy, criminal hoodlum. I won't use the term, but I think you probably get the idea. These things shocked the culture out of a state of complacency that it had fallen into during the post-war years. Today, what would the modern-day popular culture that has accepted the bourgeois, commonplace, sanitary pornography of 50 Shades of Grey and Sex and the City make of Rudy Ray Moore's shocking comedy routines? I think they might find him bland. And that's kind of scary. That's frightening. But never try to pander or condescend to your readers. Write the book you want to read, and chances are somebody else will want to read it. And that's what validates self-publishing. Because a lot of times, publisher will say, well, I've never seen a book like this. I don't know what to do with it. The answer is do something with it and find out what it means.
Do we have any further questions?
Ask that on the mic.
Let me turn it on. Do we have any further questions? No, we don't have a mic. Yes, sir.
Do you see a solution in promotion and what you were talking about with music and publishing also, but where now you can cut out the middleman, the technology where you can home studio and stuff, things that weren't available in the 60s, 70s, but you can have a band and you can be as good as Bob Dylan or the Beatles, but you're just on YouTube, and unless you can get out there and the old model, you had the radio and the promotion with the record company or the publishing house behind you, put you out there so people actually saw you to make up their mind whether they like you or not. But is that sort of a stumbling block now, that not having that ability so much, and with the record companies and the publishing houses mainly going for the tribe as opposed to looking for the next Beatles anymore, the next, is that?
If I understood the question correctly, it's a matter of where do you find your audience, essentially, right? And are you at a disadvantage? I think independent publishing is at quite a bit of an advantage because you have a little bit less overhead than some of the bigger companies, and so digital revolution has really shocked the bigger system. And so if you're not spending rent on Fifth Avenue in New York, you're a little bit free to try new things. YouTube is a great channel for musicians, also a great channel for authors. You can do live YouTube chats, you can host readings with yourself, you can have dialogues with your own audience. And how do you build that? The same way they do, but again, if you're self-publishing, you just have to be willing to go out there and do this yourself, or you have to be willing to hire a publicist yourself who does these things for you. You have to contact every media outlet in your town and say, hey, I published this thing. Do you want to do an interview with me? Here's an excerpt. Do you want to run an excerpt? Are you willing to get that list? Are you willing to work your butt off to scour the internet to find the people who are doing similar stuff to you, to ask them for a blurb or a review of your book? I mean, this is what publishers do. This is what marketing departments do. This is what people make a living doing. And there's a real value in what publishing houses offer their authors. And we can complain all day about the tastes of certain editors, but at the same time, there are some publishing houses that tell you that like they have changed my life completely because of the positive choices they have made in the literature that they presented. And so I don't completely bag on all publishing houses. And so this balance between self-publishing and publishing houses is about like how much work you yourself are willing to do. And so you're not really you're at a bit of a disadvantage because you're doing it yourself. But at the same time, DIY is amazing, and DIY is everything. And I'm doing my publishing house DIY, and these values that are about like I will build an audience, I will build a community around the art that I believe in, and hopefully other people will believe too. Yeah. I think that's unites all three of us.
Yes.
Well, thank y'all very much for. Do I have it going on? Yeah.